All right, so let's start with introductions, and we'll start on the left and go down, if that's all right.
My name's Michaelbrent Collings. I've written close to 40 books. I've written numerous movies. I'm a member of the Writers Guild of America, and I've had #1 bestsellers in science fiction, fantasy, horror, and thriller on every one of the major ebook platforms on 40 or so countries.
I'm Tyler Jolley. I'm an orthodontist. I'll be checking retainers in the back afterwards.
I have a faithful older
Yeah, wonderful. I write young adult. I have a series called The Lost Imperials. It's a steampunk series. Pretty new to the craft. It's a pleasure being on this panel with such great authors. I have some great advice, like don't eat poop. I can't say that one.
This advice just says butts.
Butts. So I hope I don't eat poop or mess this up. So it's a pleasure to be on the panel.
Hi, I'm Jim Butcher. I'm the author of the Dresden Files, the Codex Alera, and the Cinder Spires. I love talking writing craft. I love teaching it at the Superstars convention that Kevin J. Anderson kind of founded and put together. And I'm looking forward to this panel. So.
Hi, I'm Jody, Lynn. I write science fiction and fantasy novels and short stories, and I teach writing at the Dragon Con basic intensive 2-day workshop, if there are any of my survivors in the audience. And I do love talking about writing and exploring the craft with my peers and with all else.
I am Mary Robinette Kowal. I'm going to go ahead and do resume drop since you started it. I'm on the Hugo Award-winning podcast Writing Excuses, which we talk about writing 15 minutes long because you're in a hurry and we're not that smart. I also write science fiction and fantasy. I have, again, 2 Hugos in addition to the Writing Excuses Hugo.
I get so jealous anytime someone flicks their hair like that.
So she wins up 2 pounds.
I straightened somebody's molar the other day.
So I cracked a molar once. Actually, on both sides. Same.
Oh, man.
Yeah, we can talk about it. No, but not in this panel. So likewise, I also love talking about writing. 2 things that sometimes come up is that I'm also an audiobook narrator and a professional puppeteer.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. I've won awards with those too.
Stop with the hair thing!
It's a good hair day.
The puppet thing is impressive. I've always been impressed by the puppet.
Oscar de Grouch's hand.
I love puppeteers, but every time someone says, and I truly do, that's so cool, but I always think the first thing in my head, it's a twisted writer thing, it's like, you've had your hand up so many butts.
I've handled so many rods too.
Hashtag fearless girl. Nice.
Hashtag she went there.
Yeah.
I can double rod too.
Okay. Thank you, Salt Lake City. Good night.
I'm just talking about puppets. Anywhere your mind is going is someplace you're taking yourself.
Real quick, how many people in the room are writers or aspiring writers?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. So it's a room full of lunatics. If they lock us in here, the sanity quotient of the city will go up slightly. So. All right. So I think the place to start, and what I want to do is we'll just have some brief discussion about what we've got here among us, and then we'll open the floor for questions, because I think aspiring writers learn the most when they can actually interact.
Yep.
So first of all, let's just talk about plot, because there's 4 things on the list. So what is plot? And we'll start with Mary.
All right, so there's a couple of different ways to think about plot. Plot can either be when you're talking about what the story is that is happening, or, and this is the thing that most people are talking about, is the structure that you are using to convey that story to an audience. So I tend to use what's called the mice quotient, and it's the idea that every story is made up of 4 elements: milieu, inquiry, character, and event. And each of those can be the major drivers. So for instance, milieu story is a story about someone who is trying to get out of a place. An inquiry story is a story about someone who is trying to answer a question. Character stories are about internal conflict, and event stories are about external conflict. And within each of those, there are specific starting and ending points and types of conflicts that go in the middle of those. So that's one of the very many ways to think about plot.
Plot is the basic elements, the bare bones of your story. It's not always easy to figure out initially where you're going. A lot of people, there are the plotters and there are the pantsers. And the plotters are the ones who line out everything in great detail of every element that is going to happen within the story. Pantsers have a general idea of where they're going. It's much easier for you to complete a story if you have the ending already thought out, and the rising tension, the perils, the diversions that the character will accomplish or run into as they go. So you have a lot of creativity going on in that spot. So as Mary said, she has the framework for various kinds of plot. But the basic element is, what is it your character needs to accomplish, and how is he or she going to get there?
Okay. Plot.
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 Why, thank you, Jim. After listening to the Hugo Award winners on writing excuses, you learn something that there are plots that you want your whole story to be structured in, like the mice quotient that Orson Scott Card talks about, or you have the hero's journey, Trifell cycle. There's all these things, right? The 3-act, whatever. So that's kind of the main, for me it's always pick one of those or try to pick one of those. Or I know Brandon, who's on the Hugo Award winning Writing Excuses, talks about plot being progress and just having progress in your books. So as a newer writer, or as I was kind of getting into this, I learned, okay, pick something that has progression, pick a hero's journey, pick a quest. But then all of a sudden I can have these kind of little plots like romance, mystery, whatever inside the main overall plot. And that's kind of how I look at it. I pick the Trifell cycle or something like that, and then have like little micro plots inside. That's where you put your plot twists and all your other different things that you want your characters to go through.
So I always feel funny whenever I'm on these kinds of panels. I always feel like I'm the expert. I'm the Hugo winner with the great hair. I'm the super, and I'm like, I'm enthusiastic, because that's pretty much what I bring to the table. And so whenever I'm thinking about things like that, I am a very, very nuts and bolts person. So plot for me is this: it starts with a guy who or a girl who. You have to have a main person who's going to be the focal point of your story, and then the rest of it is divided into 3 stages, which is wishing, desiring, and achieving. In the first part, he's wishing, and a wish is just, you sit there and you don't do anything about it. I wish I could play harp. It's lovely. Have I ever bought one? Do I have any harp music? No. The second one is desiring, where he moves into forward action, and of course there are things that impede him, because everybody else, like Tyler said so well, has their own wish, desire, achievement. And then the last part is just, did he get it or not? And for me, that's the simplest way to think about a plot, and it really makes it easy to bang down like who this person is, what he wants, and what he'll do to get it.
So, can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Because I like writing that down, because that's a brilliant way of thinking about it. But I am going to say that anytime you hear any of us say a story must have, we are speaking bullshit at that moment. What we mean is, we write stories this way and it works well for us, and you get repeatable results if you do this thing. But there are other ways to write stories, because there's a really brilliant story called Crystallization, in which there are no characters named at all. It's entirely omniscient, and you never get deep into a character and a character's desire, and it's a brilliant story. So you can do these things, but it's important to know why you are doing them and what each of these building blocks do, so that you can pick and choose for the thing that you're looking for. Sorry,
Yeah, exactly. For writing is, there's not one true path of writing. There's a lot of different roads that go to the same sort of destination. And the path that works well for one person isn't going to work well for another, and so on. But what we're trying to do is sort of give aspiring writers a handle on where's the place I'm going to start. And when you find and if you just listen and try and find out what people think about writing, eventually you're going to stumble over something that is like, oh, that makes sense to me. Once you found the one that makes sense to you, that might be a good place to get started for you to go. It doesn't have to be where you stay. It doesn't have to be the way you always do what you do. But a lot of these are, a lot of these paths are paths that a lot of people have walked before. So it's you can take a machete and start hacking your way through the brambles if you want to, but a path might be a little smoother and easier. For me, plot is a question and an answer, and that's essentially what a story is. A story is asking a question, and it's almost always the same question too. When some event happens that changes the status quo, your protagonist sets forth to accomplish a goal. And the second part of that is, but will he succeed when your villain gets in the way and messes up his stuff? And then you answer the question. So, for example, that's called a story question. This was something that was put together by Bickham and Swain, I think. The idea is like, when Frodo discovers that the heirloom he inherited from his uncle Bilbo is the one ring of true power that can destroy all the world, he sets forth to destroy the ring. But will he succeed when the forces of evil in the world get in his way? And that's the question. And the answer to the question is yes. Which kind of really simplifies the Lord of the Rings an awful lot. Spoilers.
This is the Reader's Digest abridged version.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the core of the story of the Lord of the Rings is getting the answer to that question. And that's what the whole story is doing.
Can I jump off of that and,
yes,
and give a tool that's very useful for those of you who are on the pantsing end of the spectrum, and recognize this is a spectrum. I mean, there are plotters and pantsers, but
And there's everything.
yeah, but most of us do both of those at some point. So the yes that he just mentioned and the yes but, these are really useful things. Stories are made up of questions, and the basic question is whatever it is your protagonist did going to succeed? And that can be answered by one of 4 questions. Yes, which ends the story because you've answered the question, and that's a happy ending. No, which ends the story, and that's a tragedy. And then yes, but things get worse. No, and things get worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I kind of like the no and to be no and furthermore.
Yeah.
Things get even worse.
Yeah.
Like that.
So basically, as a writer, you have a 75% chance of a bad outcome every time.
Well, and I think that's a really great place to segue into writing a scene. Because the basic unit of telling a story, I mean, at least this is one way of thinking about it, and this is the way that I learned. The basic unit of telling a story is you have a scene and you have a reaction to a scene, which Bickham and Swain called the sequel, but I didn't think that's not easily, it gets too confusing. But scenes and reactions to scenes. All right, let's just talk about when we're writing a scene. What do we figure out? All right, and let's start here. You're writing a scene in a book. What do you need to know before you get going?
This would be great to answer with a monologue. I won't do that. Whenever I write a scene, I try to have 3 things in mind. The goal of each scene, the conflict of the scene, and for me to progress in my stories, I always have disaster as part of the scene. If you're good, you can, and if you guys ever watch some of Dave Farland's videos and things like that, he talks about hooks of chapters. This is kind of where the disaster comes in. And so it keeps kind of the reader going. So I always have goal, conflict, disaster when I go into a scene. Yeah, that's how I usually do it.
Okay.
Oh, me?
Yep. Yes, you.
Good. I don't like to go after the hair people. It just makes me feel small and hairless. See, now everything we say at this point sounds weird after the whole beginning. So, I'm a screenwriter as well as a novelist, and so screenwriters have a very kind of a specific rubric when they're talking about a scene. And it's the smallest, discrete piece of information you can give without which the story falls apart. So when I'm talking about a scene, I mean, there's scenes in movies meaning that's the thing that's happening right now on the screen, and then it cuts to a different location, and that's another way of talking about a scene. But when I'm talking about a scene, I'm talking about what is the smallest portion of my story within which something occurs, and if I take that moment out, the whole book or the whole movie falls apart. And by the way, just FYI, this is a really useful way of thinking about it, because the more you think about your scenes that way, the harder it is for other people to come in and screw with your work, because they can't pull it out or the whole thing falls apart. And it's really nice to look at a producer who says, yeah, I'd really like, the main character, instead of being a black detective, be like a lesbian dog from space. And you're like, that would mess up this scene, and the whole thing falls apart. Seriously, like, you think I'm joking, but stuff like that happens.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. That is,
So
that's like writer Aikido.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but you want what you're talking about a scene is these people doing this thing, and it's accomplished at this place, and if you pull any of those elements out at this moment, your book or your movie ceases to make sense.
Here, I'm going to flip my hair for you because that was brilliant.
2 flips up.
Yes. So I come from a theater background, and I am in complete agreement with you. I'm just going to build on top of that. So the other thing that is useful to think about with a scene is that it will, is when you end that scene. So we've talked about what gets you into it, but when do you exit it? And one of the things that I found, the 3-act structure drives me crazy, and I realize that's a larger thing, because I look at it, I'm like, but acts exist to get scenery off the stage. That's why they're there. They're a structure thing. But then it began. But then I realized that is also what they do in story. They exist to cause a jump in time or space. Or a shift in tone. Those are the things that you are doing with the scene. Can I give an example?
I don't know, can you?
Yes.
Okay.
May I?
Yes.
Please do.
Well, and you know how rigid and structured I am.
I know.
know.
We have to petition for examples. I missed that bylaw.
It's right here.
It's written right under butt.
Yeah.
That's what
That's what Donate the Poop really is. So I don't know if you've heard of the actor Patrick Stewart.
No.
He's the one in Roadhouse.
Right, yeah, that's okay. So I saw his production of Macbeth, which was brilliant. And it has the best use of an intermission I've ever seen, and I think it gives the best example of what a scene break can do for you. So there's the scene with Banquo's ghost, which is historically very difficult to stage because it raises the question of, do you have the ghost, an actor playing the ghost, or do you have it all in Macbeth's head? So this was set in a World War something hospital, and upstage there was this huge freight elevator, and they were having the banquet on these dining tables, these medical tables, and the freight elevator comes down, and Banquo is standing on it, drenched in blood, just drenched. And I'm like, oh, they've decided to go this route. And he gets off the elevator and he strides down it towards Patrick Stewart, towards Macbeth, and he, reacts to it. He jumps up, he throws the chair back, blackout. And you're like, what? Because that is not where that scene breaks. And we all go to intermission, and what they've done is that they have framed for us this thing. They have broken at a point of high tension to frame it for us. So we're all talking about it. And then we come back in, and the scene picks up at the beginning of the scene. So we're seeing the scene again, which I, by the way, do not recommend that you always do scenes twice. But we're seeing the scene again, and the elevator comes down, and it is empty. Yes.
That was so cool from up here. It's like the Skeksis in the Dark Crystal.
So that is one of the things that a scene break can do for you, is it can help you frame and shape the audience's understanding of what is happening in that scene.
God, I love manipulating audiences.
I do too. It is the best.
Sorry, that had to come out.
Must.
Yeah.
But that plays into, again, building upon that, showing where a scene begins and a scene ends. Terry Adair, who is mostly a romance writer, she says to get into a scene as late as possible before the action and then get out as quickly as you can once the action ceases. And in this case, nothing could be more compelling than having the scene break so abruptly that that is all you're thinking about. And the same should be true for any scene that you write, is you don't waste the audience's time. You want to have an important event. Any scene, I feel, I'm not going to say you should, but moves the action along, introduces an element of the plot, without which the whole thing will collapse, helps to build characters. And all of these things are important to understanding the plot and keeping it interesting as it goes. Because you can declaim something that is important but not terribly interesting as long as you are also building character and also moving the story along. So,
can I make an observation off of that?
Yes.
I love that you said, you want to get out at maximum tension, because we're always talking about, the essence of fun. I'm not going to say good, because that gets into a big, huge mess, but like most people agree that the most fun they have, the most enjoyment they get out of a story is the one that has the most tension and the most excitement. And one of the most basic and easiest ways to create tension and excitement, people think about the drama between the characters, but there's also a drama between scenes. And if you exit at max tension and then you go to an immediately contradictory scene, that creates an awesome effect, which is, you see it the most in cinema and television. There's no way I'd ever get on a balloon, and the next thing it's like, and you laugh because it's created this that's where it ends, at the earliest possible point after he makes this declaration, and the next scene creates an actual structural drama, a structural conflict that's totally apart from the characters' interactions and the dynamics that interact with the world. So it's really important that you get these scene breaks right.
the
One
problem
part of it.
with anything that begins with "I'd never"
Yeah.
is a trope we call famous last words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what happens a lot. You get very good at this, ending with tension, ending, real good. You can call them chapter hooks or scene hooks until the very end of the book. And then that last scene or two or three, they have to wrap up well. And you, as writers, you become so well at, creating tension and moving the reader along, and then all of a sudden, you get your books back from your editor and they're like, well, this is like a cliffhanger. What's up? You left this wide open. Yeah, so there is that, it's kind of an irony where you have to be able to end a scene too with low tension and just kind of tie a nice little bow on top and send it out to the world.
Yeah, for me, scenes are, it's a smaller version of a story. It's a smaller story within a story. Your character is actively pursuing a goal, and if you're actively going after that goal, and not just, I'm sort of working towards this eventual goal, we're walking towards Rivendell, to use the Lord of the Rings example, but an actual specific goal, like, oh my gosh, I have to deal with this psycho who wants to do riddles. The Riddles in the Dark is a scene. I mean, it's the best scene in The Hobbit, for example. But it's that active pursuit of the goal and a conflict where somebody's getting in the way. And I don't mean like we've got to climb a mountain or there's a long hill we have to walk up or it's storming really hard. That's just kind of part of the setting. The conflict comes from somebody who is actively trying to stop your protagonist from doing whatever he's doing. And protagonist is whether it's the main protagonist or a sub-character. If you're in a scene, you're in somebody's point of view, that's your protagonist for the time being. So the scene is that character pursuing that goal, somebody trying to get in the way, and then you got to figure out an ending that is one of the answers that Mary was talking about earlier. The yes, no, yes, but, and no, and furthermore. The scene endings, yes is too easy because it gives you what you wanted, and so you should probably try and use a minimum of yes. Yes, but is a little bit better because even though your character has accomplished his goal, there's a but at the end of it that sort of complicates his life further as you go into the story. And anything you can do to complicate your character's life further do that. The no answer is it's a little bit better than yes, but, because but it also kind of stalls your story speed a little, because if your character is charging forward trying to get the thing he wants and he just runs into a brick wall, no, then that means that he's got to stop and look around and try and find another way around the brick wall. And so while it is a good answer, it's not necessarily always the one you should be using until you get to no and furthermore, which is kind of my favorite. I don't see any reason for anything but no and furthermore until you get to the end. Because no and furthermore means that not only does your character not get his goal, but his life just got a lot more complicated too. And that's just the best of all worlds, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, the reason that I'll use the yes but instead of just no and furthermore is because it will give the reader a sense of forward progress. Because if the character is only getting no's, then it feels like
It gets frustrating.
It does. It becomes frustrating for the reader and really frustrating for you as the writer, because that straight line of the plot has to start weaving back and forth a lot, and it does slow you down. So there's always a question of balancing pace with tension.
And there's, a great example of how not to do that is Lost, which the first season of Lost had some of the most brilliant television writing I've ever seen. But the problem is they kept asking questions, and after they had 600 questions, they'd go, and here's the answer to number 482.
Right.
By the way, here's another 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
And it got very frustrating after a while, because there's no payoff. And you do have to give even if it's like your Die Hard, which is one damn thing after another, he still gets to pop off a one-liner, which makes you think he's awesome. He gets to shoot a red shirt bad guy, which is cool and looks awesome, but you can't have him always do that, but you do need to pepper enough in that your audience isn't like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go kill myself.
But there also has to be, to add to that, places where you're raising the tension and places where you release the tension.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the yes but can come in, because you are in a terrible situation. Master, may I use an example?
Okay.
In the F. Paul Wilson's The Keep, these people are being haunted.
Good.
Yes, it is. It's a terrific story. There's a demon, vampire-ish thing haunting this huge castle that has been taken over by Nazis. And among their prisoners is a rabbi. And this thing has been popping up and scaring people, but it is intelligent. Dumb villains, by the way, are not fun, and they're not interesting because they're going to do something more stupid than a smart person would do. And if we can second guess the villain, then we're probably going to get bored with the book. But in this case, the demon pops into the room in which the rabbi is being held. And of course, the rabbi is terrified, and on the wall is a crucifix. And for some reason, the rabbi is moved as the creature moves towards him to grab the crucifix off the wall and shove it at the monster, which deliberately makes a decision to recoil and then flee, leaving the rabbi in a crisis of conscience. And in a very scary book, this breaks the tension and allows him to build it again.
Nice. Although I want to make a quick comment on if your dumb villains are too predictable, you're not going dumb enough.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Let's
yes.
go farce.
You want to go full dumb.
You never go full retard. All right, it's about time to open the floor to questions, you think? Okay, let's do that. So if you got writers writing questions, and this is your chance to talk to professionals. So there's a microphone right here.
There we go.
Can I make a quick request? It's not in the bylaws, but I'd like to move that we amend such.
Mary, check this.
It's get ready to flick your hair. It's the last little bit of the convention. Everybody's super tired and everybody wants to talk, so could you make your questions quick and to the point?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Okay, my question
Approved.
is,
Approved?
are stories like
Yes.
Alexander Dumas's, great epic novels, are those types of stories still acceptable to publish today because they aren't super fast-paced, exciting
Have you read a Brandon Sanderson novel?
Yes, but he does have a lot of action still in his.
This high, this wide.
Yes,
We're
but
very
he
big.
still has a lot of action in his stories compared to Alexander Dumas's.
Yes, absolutely. There are definitely places for these stories. I can think of some examples. A lot of the examples that I can think of are in mainstream literature, more so than in science fiction and fantasy. But that very claustrophobic sense that he has, yeah, you can absolutely do that.
And you have to ask too, do you want to be published or do you want to be read? I have never had a Big 5 publishing contract, but I'm an indie and I do okay.
Yeah, write what you want to write.
Yeah.
And
You can
don't write
write
for the
how you
market.
Write it well and you will get readers.
Yeah, at the end of the day, writing what you want to write is very important because getting into the writing business is kind of a marathon. And if you're constantly doing stuff you really don't want to do, it's just going to grind away at you. You really got to be doing something you're passionate about.
It's like running barefoot on broken glass as it is, but you don't have to do it on your face.
Yeah.
It's like jumping into a pool of double-edged razor blades, or sticking a ice pick under a toenail or two.
Thanks for that visual.
Thanks.
So basically, Reader's Digest version of I am terrified of world building because one of my good friends world builds like Tolkien, and he's giving me advice to world build like Tolkien. I found some ways to world build. Oh, sorry.
Why are you apologizing? Because his
we
microphone
have-
sucks.
That's our AV
So-
guy. I didn't know we had one.
So, terrified of world building. Found a method to world build, but I'm still scared to death of building a world because I don't like building places. Do you have any tips or advice for approaching it that doesn't involve Tolkien and building a language?
Well, Tolkien built Tolkien's world. You kind of need to build your world.
Well, also, you can totally skip that part, actually. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
So here's how I handle world building. I follow the Scalzi method, which is that I only go 3 questions deep. Which is, so it's like, my character's using a fountain pen. Well, why a fountain pen? Because her grandmother taught her to write. Well, why did her grandmother teach her to write? Because she was living there. Well, why was she living there? And if you have to go more than 3 questions deep, something else is terribly wrong with the story. Like if the reader is hung up on the fountain pen, something else has gone wrong. So just go 3 get to write the story when you get to a question, ask it, ask why 3 times. What I do is I go back 3 times, so 3 layers back, which is your past, 3 layers currently, which is your present, your how, and then 3 layers in the future, which is with what effect. And that's it. And the other thing that I do is that when I hit a thing and I'm like, I don't know, I just put a bracket and I go jargon and and keep going.
Totally.
You totally do not have to,
Remember, your stories are driven by character. That's if you have issues with too much world building, which there are some beautiful places out there on page, but just remember your characters are what drives the story. Right?
Basically, what I've had to do is character build first.
Yeah. Here's the thing too, is like the way I work it, I never start a book or a movie without having a movie poster in my head. And that's the best way I found to world build, because if I've got a kick-ass movie poster, I know what the haunted house looks like. And finding out what's behind each door inside the haunted house, that's not world building, that's plot and geography. But I've already figured out the scenes. Like I have a book called Strangers, Here's the World. Family wakes up late, they run to the front door because they're late, it won't open, the back door won't open, the side door won't open. They open the blinds, all the windows are covered in sheet metal, and there's a guy in there with them who wants some alone time. World built! And so you don't have to get hung up on this big, like, I have to have an 8,000 page Bible for San Salada, my beautiful planet floating in the ethosphere. It's like, they can be smaller and more intimate things. You don't have to write other people's stuff, write your stuff.
You want to have the world, all you need. You don't have to know the history of the city that's on the other side of the planet. Build the first part that you need, and then as you go on, build the parts that you need after that.
Yeah, I have never, ever built a story Bible.
God, you guys are so sophisticated. I run a role-playing game in the world I'm building. Because you can build a role-playing game world, and you can build it very carefully, just as carefully as you want. You can put so much time into it, and as soon as the players get their hands on it, they're going to go somewhere that is nowhere that you wrote about, and you're going to be frantically laying out the planks like 6 inches in front of them as they charge ahead. I mean, if you're a good GM, that's what you got to do. And that's where I've done a lot of my world building is that, because it doesn't matter how much I used to put all kinds of effort into that forward work, you know. But these days, it's like, okay, you know what? I've got this shape of the world, and here's going to be this. Here's sort of the situation they're going to start in, and they're just going to go do their own damn thing anyway. So go. I will make it up as we go along.
They're never going to visit the forest of Slavhanka, so why should I put it in?
Exactly.
And then when you come to the end, you will go back and revise your manuscript so that
you'll-
everything matches,
Yes.
and then you will have built
You-
as you go along.
You will know your world so much better when you get to the end of the story, after your characters have run around in it and done all kinds of ridiculous nonsense. And then you'll be able to refine it a little bit more, and that's where rewriting comes in.
The book you start is not the book you finish, so you have to go back and fix it so that it's all the same.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Hi.
Hi. I have this problem where I can create a plot. I have an excellent, in my idea. But the second I go to sit down, it's like gone, and I can't write.
Can you talk it?
Yeah.
Can you say it into a voice memo on your phone or in a little pocket tape recorder and get those things down that way?
Lips.
Right.
Any way you can get it down is the right way.
Do you have a young person in your family, like a niece or nephew who's 5 or below?
No.
Find one. They're everywhere. Children, like, they're outside of, like, Sears, just sitting there.
So just approach the strange child.
You will have some restraining orders, but for every restraining order, there's 100 more kids. Find a little kid and tell the story to the little kid. Because, and I used to be a lawyer, and this is what I did to prep for trial. For, like, millions and millions of dollars, I'd find a little kid and be like, let me tell you about polyethylene sheeting. If you can tell the story to the kid, it's going to be in your head.
So, I'm gonna, okay, so, because these are all good pieces of advice, but I'm going to bet that you're dealing with a different thing. And that is that you're dealing with fear. And I say this because, so I deal with depression, and fear is part of the expansion pack of depression. Terrible, terrible UI. So one of the things that I found when it has been really bad, where I cannot write, but I have a deadline. Here are some things that I have found that help me. One of them is to ask, why don't I want to write this? And then the follow-up question is, what would make me want to write this? So that's some deep thought stuff. But then there's some other things. One of which, do you like to play games?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds like the beginning of a Saw movie, like if she follows you to the bathroom.
Do you like to play games?
There's a game called For the Words, the number 4, For the Words. It's online. It turns writing into a role-playing game in which the mechanic that you are using to defeat the monsters is the number of words you write and the time in which you write them. And you go on quests, you get avatars that you can dress up, and there are sometimes these timed quests. Like, I have been writing every day at this convention because there was a quest that was only available this week, and I wanted that hat. So find the thing that will make you want to write. And it may be the story, it may be something else. Sometimes I will set a timer for 15 minutes. And what happens is about 8 minutes in, I'm like, oh, I'm so thirsty. I'm like, really? You're gonna die in the next 8 minutes if you don't. Just stay in the chair. And the bargain is your fingers cannot stop moving. The other trick that I use, which is really great, because it's a non-fear thing, is the bargain you make with yourself is that every day you're going to sit down and you are going to write 3 sentences. And those 3 sentences can be, I am tired, I hate this, I'm going to bed now. But you're going to write 3 sentences, and what usually happens is those 3 sentences turn into more than 3. But even if they don't, you have written 3 sentences farther in your story. I have a story that is in Uncanny Magazine called Midnight Hour, and that was written at a point when it was a really bad depressive spell. And that story was written 3 sentences at a time, and you cannot tell that I was dealing with that. And I'm not saying that you are dealing with depression, but there's a lot of overlap. A lot of overlap.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
To include, to go on to it, it's the character for and then the words.
Yeah, for the words. It is amazing. It is so good.
Okay, magic.
That's more of a statement than a question. Hold on, did anybody bring a deck of cards?
Come on, you can do it.
Well, so I've always had trouble with making magic because I've always loved making fantasy, but magic is really hard to make, and I've always loved the idea of hard magic, which magic with rules, and I've loved that magic, but I've never been able to make my own feel original.
Okay. What do you need magic to accomplish in your world? Here's a bunch of questions, and you can keep them in your head. What does magic need to accomplish? Who has it? How do they get it? And what do they generally do with it? Is it important? Is it something that sets people apart, or is it just there every day? You know, you can make a cantrip to clean windows or to summon a dragon. What are the gradations of magic in your world? Who is able to attain it? Do you have to be born with the mitochondria or whatever?
Yeah, like the force is space herpes.
That's the power of
Pissed me off.
Yes, I know. But this might help you start to design a system, is knowing where it comes from and how it runs out. Because without physics of magic, where you have a shortage based upon time, investment, elements that you use up in the course of a spell, then you know how much you have for your story. And always you have just little enough or just enough so that the character still has to put him or herself out in order to accomplish the story. It can't be done by magic alone.
Yeah, and don't get hung up on making a magic system that's original. I mean, Jim's magic system in the Dresden books is not an original magic system. But the context in which he is using it and the way the characters interact with it, that's the stuff that's really cool. You know, the stuff that I've got in the Glamorous Histories, I was just rereading The Wheel of Time, and I'm like, oh, look at them talking about flows and weaves, and here I was thinking I was all original, basing magic terminology on textiles. I was like, and I forgot that I had totally absorbed these books. Don't stress about it.
Also, really quick too, the best magic systems that I've found, they're not complicated, they're very simple. The cool part is the ramifications of it. So read the Grimoire series by Larry Correia. He's got a bunch of magic users, it's awesome, it's an alt history 1930s, and everybody's like dames and guys, you know, but the main character's a heavy, and basically he can manipulate gravity. And Larry, the magic isn't, the magic of
heavy,
magic.
they can manipulate gravity.
Well, that's all it is.
Okay, yeah.
But it's Larry sitting there and going like, how can I screw somebody up in a fight scene with a guy that can do that? You know, kind of thing. And that's where the fun is, and that's where your magic comes in. Or, you know, Mary's talking about, she read this book and she absorbed it. Who cares? Because Mary is going to have all sorts of different Mary thoughts that like, then this happened, but then what happens? Then this happened. And that's where that's the magic, because you, my dear, are the magic.
Let me piggyback on that real quick. That was nice. I like your goggles. Yes, ramifications are awesome. And I would almost say what's fun for me when I do magic is the limitation of what that magic does.
Yes.
Or doesn't do, I should say. It messes your characters up a bunch. And this gets into, well, okay, they're in a situation. You don't want this magic system that every situation they can use something to get out of. Same being, you know, GMing games and things like that. If you have these all-time powerful characters, they're some of the most boring characters because they can like fix anything and do anything. And,
Yeah, you have no conflict.
There's no conflict. But if you put limitations in your magic, so you have all your rules, like we've been talking about, you have your ramifications, you can do your hard magic. It can be original, it can be non-original, but also have limitations. So when your characters get to those certain points, you can be like, okay, they can't use their magic very well. Maybe they can do something very little to get them kind of far, but not really, because it kind of messes things up. So limitations are super important with magic systems.
And it also makes it so much more interesting because then you have the ingenuity of the character working around these shortages.
One more thing. I don't want to talk about the magic part of your question. I want to talk about the part of your question where you said it doesn't feel original. To a degree, it's really, really useful to be able to learn to ignore your feelings and just get on with the writing. Because there are times when I'm writing and sometimes I write and the scene just leaps off my fingers and it's awesome. And other times I'm writing and it is like pulling teeth out through your nose to get this scene done. And when it's finished, you look at it.
There's been a canine.
Yeah. And when you finish, you look at it with all the love that you would show a newborn tapeworm, and then you're just like, oh God, thank God that at least that's done with. But boy, that is the worst thing I've ever written. Then you move on. But a lot of that is not actually what you wrote. It's not about what you actually put down. It's about the way you felt when you were putting it down. Lots of times when you go back and look at that scene that you thought was so terrible, the further you get from that moment that you were in, as you go forward in time, a day, a week, 2 weeks, a month, and look back at it, you can't really tell, did I really think that scene was that awful? Because that seems fairly solid. Okay, moving on with my life. So to a degree, don't worry too much about necessarily about how it feels. If it feels original enough for you, don't. Just because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you take the exact same ingredients and are trying to make exactly the same dish that I am in the kitchen. Whatever you wind up making with those ingredients, more than likely it's going to be something completely different than what I made in the kitchen, even though we're using the same basic parts, the same basic foods. Because I'm putting things together my way, and I'm cooking it up my way, and you're cooking it up your way. So don't worry too much about getting too close to other people. Just do your thing. If it's a magic system that you like and that it interests you, go with it.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. You're very welcome.
Hey, so I am super curious in the sequence in which you guys write your novels. So do you start kind of linearly, like you start at the beginning and work your way through the middle to the end? Or is it like piecing together a puzzle of scenes and at the end you're like, what do you know, I got myself a novel?
That's totally how everyone does it. And we all sound like Luigi too. We're like, we got it.
I generally go from beginning to end in order. I don't plot it out very super thickly as I go, but I always know what the beginning of the book's going to be. I know what the ending of the book's going to be. I know a big flashy part in the middle that I'm going to do, and I know a bunch of one-liners that I want to get Dresden to drop along the way. But you don't need to be able to see the entire journey from beginning to end. It's like driving cross country at night. All you can really see is what's immediately ahead of you in your headlights. But if you've got an idea of where you're going, eventually you'll get there. You might take a wrong turn and wander off and have to come back on track. But you don't have to have the whole thing.
I concur. I generally write mine linearly too.
The one exception is mystery. You have to hash out your ending much more carefully. If you're doing like a full-fledged only mystery, like that's the main and only emphasis, you really need to figure out who dies. And like how they died kind of thing.
Unless you're Agatha Christie, who...
Yeah, she pulls in like, what you didn't know for the last 700 pages was I had an outside investigation going, and here's the elements of DNA that he found. That's a bit of a cheat.
Yeah, well, not that actually. What she would do is she would have multiple people who had the motive and opportunity, and she wouldn't decide which one was the one who actually did it until she got to the end.
Oh, that means you wouldn't overbalance anything, even unconsciously on what
Okay, I think we're going to have time for one more question, Penelope.
Yes.
And then we're going to be done. I'm sorry for the folks who didn't get a chance.
Okay, so I've been writing a story since I was about 12, and it's taken various forms since then, and it's getting way better. But I'm trying to figure out how to go from the basic story plot, beginning, end, some of the flashy points in the middle, and create more scenes so it's a story instead of just an outline.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
That you learn how to do that with something else instead of the project that is the project of your heart. Part of it is that one of the things that happens when we spend a lot of time with a project is that we stop being able to see it, and we stop being able to tell which pieces we've already put down on the page and which pieces we haven't. And when you're learning to do craft with any other art form, like with violin, you have to do etudes and scales and bowing exercises. With dance, there are all of these very basic compulsory exercises that you have to do. And I think that's something that's very useful for a writer is to, when they have a project that is, you know, the project of their heart, is to practice their technique on something that is not precious to them, so that you don't worry about messing it up. And I think that if you write something else, you'll understand how to flesh out something more easily.
Don't do your first surgery on your baby.
Built a baby surgery.
David Gerald likes to say that the first million words don't count. So put aside your precious one and just write other things until you learn the chops that you need in order to go back and make that one perfect.
Either your first story sucks and so you should just get past it, or it's good and you don't want to ruin it with your sucky crap. And so like I was talking to David Shore, who's the guy, he made a story, like a show some people have heard of called House. It did all right. And it was his very first idea. And you know, and we were, I'm not like best friends, I'm not name dropping, but like he did this and we were talking in a WGA thing, and he said, I'm really glad I didn't make it when I started because it would have sucked. And so Mary's absolutely right. Like when you're at this point, I think your only alternative is to move away from it or destroy it. You can always circle back. I've got things that I thought of when I was 12-year-old that I still think are awesome because they're fart jokes, and I still think those are great. You don't have to like live with them.
I admit I have started over once or twice.
Then put it aside. You probably worked it so much that
And
touching it again will annoy you.
And I know that that is not the answer that you wanted to hear. And I know that because I have so my first novel, which I call Novel Zero, took me 10 years to write. It starred my D&D character. And it was a mashup of Battlestar Galactica and the A-Team, which sounds like a great pitch and was really not. That novel is never going to see the light of day because when I went and wrote something else, I was like, oh, okay, no, now I know. And I kept thinking, I'm going to go back and fix it. And when I went back and fixed it, looked at it again, I was like, I'm actually more excited about these new stories than I am about the old one. But I have another, but I was able to carve out the pieces of it that I loved and sell them as short stories. So there are no wasted words. And when I'm telling you to go write something else, I'm not saying you've wasted your time on this, because you have not. You have not wasted your time on this. But if it is the project of your heart, it is go play with something else and then come back and revisit it and see which pieces are the ones that you truly love and then build on those.
And may I say, from the point of view who has a lot of pieces of my heart that I haven't worked on yet, it may be a long time in coming.
Yeah.
So be patient with it. Don't force it until you're ready with it. And yeah, maybe it'll be patient zero, and it won't be something that you'll ever put out there for other people. But be patient with yourself too. You're learning.
I got that same advice from my writing teacher, and I ignored it for many years in a row. At the point where I finally said, all right, you know what, I'm just going to prove to her how wrong she is. And the method I chose to do that was that I was going to do absolutely everything she told me to exactly the way she told me to. I was going to go to this different genre that she thought I might do well in, and I was going to tell the story with a different kind of writing, from a first-person viewpoint, and I was going to fill out all the little charts and do her little character outlines and all those things, and then she was going to see what cookie-cutter pablum crap emerged from that kind of process. So I wrote the first book of the Dresden Files.
So there.
Which clearly showed her, but
Did you dedicate the book to her?
I did indeed. The first book of Stormfront says, for my father who taught me everything I needed to know about living, and for my teacher Debbie Chester who taught me everything I needed to know about writing. And but yeah, go out and play in somebody else's sandbox and see what it feels like.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you had a good time.
I have an online lecture series or an online, geez, I let me use writer word good. I have an online writing course that's $200 normally. I love the Salt Lake Comic Con, so I have coupons up here for a $35 writing course if anybody's interested.
I just have bookmarks.
You have the hair!
We have the hair, and our podcast is free.